Chris Harlan tilted his cup slowly, deliberately, and poured the coffee straight onto my laptop. Not a slip, not a mistake, a clean, intentional arc of dark liquid flooding the keyboard in the middle of the executive table. The sound was soft, absorbing, final. Chris didn't apologize. He didn't even look concerned. Relax, he added. It's just coffee. And honestly, it's just a laptop. A few people froze. Someone laughed, sharp and nervous. Like a reflex they hadn't learned to control yet. Every eye turned toward me. I felt the heat crawl up my neck. The kind of humiliation that doesn't explode, it tightens, compresses, traps you inside your own body while everyone waits to see how small you'll become. I'd like to clarify a few things. This story contains fictionalized elements, created with the help of AI, designed to reflect real workplace situations and deliver a strong educational message through storytelling. If this isn't something you'd like to listen to right now, it's okay to step away, rest, and take care of your well-being. But if you're still here, let's continue. I didn't say anything. I reached forward, picked up the thick contract binder lying beside my laptop, the one Chris had mocked earlier as administrative clutter, and pressed it calmly onto the soaked keyboard. Paper met liquid. Ink bled. $40 million worth of clauses quietly absorbed caffeine. Chris noticed. He smiled wider. "See?" he said, nodding toward me. "That's efficiency. Greta knows how to clean up messes." The laughter came again. Louder this time, not because it was funny, but because he was new, confident, and sitting at the head of the table. My hands stayed steady, my face stayed neutral. Inside, everything pulled inward, shock, shame, pressure, layered tight and sealed. I don't speak much in meetings. That's always made people underestimate me. But I'm always in the room when deals close, always copied when numbers start drifting, always there when confidence runs out and contracts start asking questions. Chris hated that side of the company. He called it paper drag. He believed authority lived in tone, not structure. He wrapped up the meeting without another glance at me. "Next time," he said, standing. "Let's keep things less administrative." I waited until the room emptied. Then I opened my phone and sent one short email. No context, no emotion, just one line confirming scope authority. Per schedule C. And only then did I allow myself to smile. I hope this story is finding you in a calm place while you're listening. Maybe lower the screen brightness, just a little small things like that can ease tension without interrupting your day. Where are you listening from? If you want more stories that understand quiet moments like this, subscribing helps us keep going. And then, something subtle shifted in that room. Invisible work rarely announces itself. It hides in margins, footnotes, and late nights when everyone else has already decided the deal is done. I remembered stitching contracts back together after midnight, fixing language that would have cost us millions, correcting assumptions the previous CEO made because he trusted speed more than structure. He used to joke that I was the insurance policy no one wanted to read, but he listened. Chris Harlan did not. After the coffee incident, my name started disappearing from calendars. Strategy meetings moved without me. Threads went quiet the moment I joined. When I did manage to speak, Chris waved it off with a smile. "That's administrative overhead," he said once, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We'll handle the real decisions here." The room nodded. Nobody challenged him. What they didn't see were the hours I spent reviewing legacy clauses, mapping dependencies, tracking obligations that didn't show up on slides. Chris loved the spotlight. He loved bold statements, quick edits, and applause at the end of meetings. I worked where no one clapped. The imbalance grew sharper when I noticed changes in the contract files. Chris had rewritten a key appendix himself, bypassing review, striking language he called cautious. He didn't ask. He didn't notify. He assumed authority followed his title. I flagged the risks quietly. The response never came. Instead, Chris announced progress in the next town hall, speaking confidently about flexibility and control. People applauded. I sat still, listening to words that no longer matched records. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. It wasn't Chris. It was an email from our partner's legal team, worded urgent, a question about scope, enforcement, and who exactly held authority to interpret the appendix Chris had changed. They hadn't copied him. They had sent it directly to me. Authority doesn't announce itself with a title. It lives quietly in definitions, permissions, and the spaces most people skim past. That afternoon, after the message from the partner's legal team, I didn't respond right away. I opened the internal contract repository instead and pulled the original authorization framework, the one that had survived 3 CEOs and more revisions than anyone remembered. I wasn't the signatory. My name didn't appear on the press releases or closing photos. Chris Harlan signed. His name carried weight in headlines, but I was listed elsewhere, deeper in the structure, as authorized contract controller. It wasn't ceremonial. It meant I governed scope interpretation, amendment validity, and enforcement sequencing. Signatures initiated deals. My role decided when they actually took effect. Chris never asked about that distinction. He assumed authority followed the pen. I didn't correct him. I didn't warn the board. I didn't confront him in a hallway or send a carefully worded message. I simply updated the records. Each change he made without review was logged, time-stamped, and cross-referenced against the authorization matrix. No drama, no commentary, just documentation doing its job. The system responded the way systems always do when inputs stop aligning. Notifications triggered quietly. Flags appeared in places executives rarely checked. The contract status shifted from active to conditional, invisible to most dashboards, but very visible to anyone who knew where to look. Meetings continued without me. Chris spoke with increasing confidence about control and momentum. I listened, calm on the outside, calculating on the inside. Every assumption he voiced rested on authority he didn't actually hold. Late that evening, as I finalized the compliance update, a small alert appeared on my screen. Plain text, no emotion, role misalignment detected. I stared at it for a moment, then closed the window. Nothing had exploded. Nothing had collapsed. Yet, the system had noticed the gap between title and control. And once a system notices something like that, it doesn't forget. I knew then the tension would only tighten. Authority, once misaligned, creates pressure in every process it touches. Emails slow, decisions hesitate, people sense instability before they can name it. I remained silent, letting procedure replace personality. Chris still believed momentum protected him. He didn't understand that systems don't argue. They simply wait, record, and eventually enforce. That realization settled heavily, sharpening my focus while the room continued pretending nothing had changed. If you've ever been treated unfairly, this story is for you. Delays never announce themselves loudly. They arrive as silence, as calendar holds that stay tentative, as numbers that refuse to move on schedule. The first tranche was supposed to clear that morning. By noon, nothing had landed. By mid-afternoon, the room felt tighter, as if everyone sensed the pressure building, but no one wanted to name it. Chris Harlan named it anyway. He stormed into the finance area demanding answers, voice sharp enough to carry, according to him. This was a finance failure, cash flow, timing. Someone hadn't pushed hard enough. He didn't look at me once while he spoke, which was almost worse than the coffee. I sat at my desk, watching dashboards refresh without changing, feeling the tension settle into my shoulders. The CFO, Mark Ellison, stood beside him, nodding too quickly. Mark used to meet my eyes when things went wrong. Now he studied the floor, the wall, his phone, anything but me. It told me more than his words ever could. He knew this wasn't finance. He also knew saying that out loud would cost him. Meetings multiplied, emails grew shorter. Chris demanded revised forecasts and contingency plans, treating symptoms like causes. I reviewed the contract status quietly, confirming what the system already knew. The tranche wasn't delayed. It was paused, conditional, waiting for alignment that no longer existed. By late afternoon, Chris was pacing, irritation giving way to anger. He blamed Treasury, then compliance, then outside counsel. Each accusation landed harder than the last, cracking confidence across the floor. People began choosing sides by staying silent. I stayed still. Then an email arrived, clean and precise, addressed to a small group. Legal language, neutral tone. One question stood out, simple and devastating. Why isn't Miss Sue? Chase copied on this. The sender was the partner's lead attorney. I read it twice. Chris wasn't included. Neither was Mark, just me and two compliance addresses. The room around me kept moving, unaware that something essential had shifted. The delay wasn't a glitch anymore. It was a signal. And signals, once noticed, tend to multiply. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing near a fault line, hearing the first quiet snap beneath the surface. Everyone kept working, talking, pretending momentum still applied. I understood then that cracks don't start with noise. They start with omission, with one name missing from a line that matters. And once noticed, that absence would reshape every conversation, every decision, and every expression in the days ahead. Without asking anyone for permission, clauses don't announce themselves when they activate. They don't flash red or demand attention. They wait, patient and exact, for the moment when behavior finally matches the condition written years earlier by someone who understood human nature better than most executives ever will. The ethics and representation clause had always been there, buried deep, cross-referenced twice, rarely discussed. It existed for moments when authority became performance instead of responsibility. The moment Chris rewrote the appendix without review, the condition was already satisfied. I didn't trigger anything. I didn't submit a complaint or raise a concern. I simply stopped correcting his mistakes. That was all it took. The system registered the inconsistency quietly. Representation authority flagged as conditional. Ethical compliance moved into review status. No alerts went to Chris. No one knocked on his door. Momentum continued, or at least the illusion of it did. That's how these things work. Collapse never starts with noise. Chris remained confident. When the partner asked for clarification, he responded with another amendment, drafted quickly, signed even faster. He called it decisive leadership. I called it the second mistake. He still didn't copy me. I watched the record update itself. Timestamp, version history, authority mismatch, everything documented without commentary. This wasn't personal. It was procedural, by then. The tone around the office had shifted. Conversations lowered. Meetings shortened. People sensed resistance without understanding where it lived. Chris blamed delays on caution and promised resolution. He believed urgency could overpower structure. It never does. Late that evening, after most of the floor had emptied, a notification appeared in my inbox. Not from Chris, not from legal, from the board's secure channel. Attached was a memo drafted in neutral language, the kind that pretends nothing unusual is happening while preparing for everything. CEO authority temporarily suspended for review. I read it once, then again. There was no triumph in it, just confirmation. The clause had done exactly what it was designed to do. No accusations, no spectacle. A pause, imposed by governance, to contain risk before it spread. Chris didn't know yet. He was probably drafting another confident message, another clean signature. I closed the file and shut down my screen, feeling a quiet satisfaction settle in, not pleasure, but alignment. Systems had noticed what behavior had revealed. I hadn't outmaneuvered him. I hadn't challenged him. I had simply stepped back and let the framework respond. Leadership failures rarely fall apart because someone pushes. They fall apart because no one catches them anymore. As I left the office, I understood something clearly. The clause nobody reads is never about punishment. It's about prevention. And once it activates, everything changes direction without asking who's in charge. Listen closely, the next small detail changed everything. Resistance doesn't arrive quietly. It arrives as accusation. The morning after the memo circulated, Chris called an emergency meeting and finally said my name out loud. He framed it as concern, Then as blame, delays were my fault. Confusion was my fault. He said I had overstepped, interfered, slowed progress. The room listened while he built a story that positioned me as the obstacle between momentum and money. When that didn't land, he escalated. Chris demanded my termination, citing loss of trust. He wanted it done immediately, quietly, before confidence slipped any further. I watched faces around the table tighten. No one agreed. No one refused. They all understood the same thing at once. Removing me would freeze every active contract under review. No authority transfer, no interim controller. Everything would stop. Chris realized it too. Seconds later, his argument stalled mid-sentence. He pushed back harder, insisting authority could be reassigned. Exceptions made. Paperwork rushed. Legal didn't answer. Finance stared at their screens. Silence pressed in. Heavy and unmoving. I said nothing. Opposition didn't require words. The framework was already resisting for me by noon. The tension had spread beyond the boardroom. Emails went unanswered. Calls were deferred. Chris paced, voice sharp, demanding solutions that no longer existed. He was trapped by the very speed he worshipped, unable to move forward without the system he'd dismissed. That afternoon, a calendar invite appeared, requested by the partner, marked urgent. I opened it without surprise. My name was listed. Legal, compliance, operations. One absence was impossible to miss. Chris wasn't invited. Minutes later, his assistant asked if I knew about the meeting. I said yes. She asked why he wasn't included. I told her the truth, the request didn't come from us. The confrontation ended without a scene. No shouting, no victory speech. Just containment tightening around him. Option by option. Resistance doesn't always look like a fight. Sometimes it looks like doors closing softly, one at a time, until the person inside finally understands they're the only one still pushing. I remained seated after the invite went out, breathing through the pressure without letting it show. The escalation was no longer loud, it was procedural. Every pathway Chris tried to force rerouted around him, redirecting authority back into structure. Watching that happen felt unreal and inevitable at the same time. He had demanded resistance and found it embedded everywhere, unmovable and impersonal, waiting for him to stop struggling. It wasn't anger driving the moment, but pressure building against his assumptions, tightening until the system would decide the next move without consulting him. And that realization was beginning to show on his face before the meeting even started. For anyone watching closely, silence, when chosen deliberately, is colder than any argument. It settles into rooms and stays there, forcing everyone to live with what has already been decided. The board meeting that afternoon was brief, almost efficient. No raised voices, no speeches, just restrained faces and careful language. Chris sat at the center of the table, waiting for support that never arrived. Laura Bennett spoke first. Her tone was even, professional, impossible to misread. She didn't look at her notes when she addressed him. She looked directly at Chris. "This is not personal," she said. "This is containment." The words landed without drama, heavier than anger ever could. Chris opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. He tried again, arguing urgency, market pressure, leadership optics. Laura listened without interrupting, hands folded, expression unchanged. When he finished, she nodded once, as if acknowledging effort rather than substance. No one defended him, not openly, not indirectly. Silence filled the gaps where alliances should have been. Each board member understood the risk calculus now. Protecting Chris meant amplifying exposure. Silence meant control. I sat along the wall, present but uninvited to speak. That was fine. My role wasn't to persuade. It was to observe the moment authority quietly shifted away from performance and back toward governance. The board wasn't choosing sides. It was choosing stability. The decision came without ceremony. Chris would remain CEO in title, pending review. Operational authority involving partners would be rerouted. Communications would be centralized. Temporary measures. They called it necessary measures. Chris's jaw tightened. He asked who would speak to the partner. Laura answered without hesitation. Not you. The room didn't react. That was the most telling part. No gasps, no discomfort. Everyone already knew. Chris had lost the one thing he valued most, the microphone. After the meeting, the hallway felt longer than usual. Conversations resumed in low tones, careful and selective. Chris walked ahead of me without turning around. Posture stiff, steps quick. Isolation moves fast once it starts. By the end of the day, the update went out. Partner communications would flow through designated channels. Authority limits clarified. Interim structures defined. My name appeared where it always had. Quietly. Precisely. Chris's did not. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt distance. The kind that forms when someone realizes the room no longer responds to their voice. Power hadn't been taken from him. It had simply stopped acknowledging him. As I shut down my computer that evening, the building felt colder, not hostile, controlled. Silence had been chosen, and with it came a new order. One that didn't need explanation or debate. Chris would learn. Slowly. That isolation isn't imposed by enemies. It's created when governance decides the noise has become the risk. Panic changes the temperature of a company. It leaks into hallways, sharpens voices, shortens patience. By the end of that week, reporters started calling with polite questions that carried teeth. They asked about delays, about governance reviews, about why a $40 million partnership hadn't moved forward as planned. Communications issued statements that said nothing and somehow made things worse. Internally, the contract was no longer delayed. It was frozen. $40 million sat on hold. Not canceled, not approved. Suspended inside a structure designed to prevent exactly this kind of exposure. Dashboards showed neutral colors, but everyone felt the weight behind them. The silence from the partner was louder than any rejection. Chris felt it most. He stopped posturing and started reacting. Meetings blurred together. Instructions contradicted themselves. He asked legal for shortcuts that didn't exist. Finance for timelines they couldn't promise. Pressure stripped away confidence, leaving urgency raw and unfiltered. The room watched him realize momentum was gone. I stayed where I had always been, reviewing records, confirming status, answering questions when asked. No one accused me anymore. No one challenged me either. They were too busy watching the numbers refuse to move. The media questions escalated. Investors wanted reassurance. The board wanted containment. Chris wanted answers, for the first time. His eyes found mine in meetings and didn't slide away. Recognition arrived without apology. He understood then what authority actually meant, and where it lived. Late one evening, after most offices had gone dark, my inbox refreshed. The sender made me pause. Chris Harlan. The subject line was careful, neutral, almost humble. Alignment meeting. I opened it slowly. The message was short. No accusations, no demands. Just an acknowledgement that things had become misaligned and a request to get on the same page before external pressure intensified. He copied legal. He copied compliance. For the first time. He copied me. I didn't respond right away. I closed my laptop and sat there, listening to the building hum around me. Panic does that. It reveals who understands systems and who only understands speed. $40 million doesn't disappear loudly. It waits, suspended, forcing everyone involved to confront the difference. When I finally replied, I kept it brief. I accepted the meeting. No commentary, no reassurance. Alignment, after all, isn't negotiated through tone, it's established through structure, and structure was already speaking for itself. Nothing moved overnight. But the pressure reached its peak, tightening every process, every conversation, every decision, until delay itself became a message. And everyone understood that the next step would expose who truly held responsibility within the organization and beyond it. Without any warning, The second smile came quietly. It didn't arrive in a meeting or a headline, and it wasn't meant to be seen. It surfaced as I walked into the alignment meeting, took my seat, and felt the pressure in the room finally settle into clarity. Chris Harlan looked smaller than before, not diminished in status, but stripped of noise. The confidence that once filled space now stayed close to him. Careful, contained. He spoke first, outlining concerns, timelines, external pressure. His words were measured, rehearsed, missing the edge that used to dominate every room. I listened without interrupting. Legal walked through the framework. Compliance confirmed conditions. The Partners' Council spoke plainly about risk, representation, and trust. Every sentence circled the same conclusion without naming it. Authority had already shifted. Control had already moved. When it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't recap history or defend my role. I didn't explain how we got there. I said one sentence, the contract already decided. No emphasis, no pause, just fact. Silence followed, dense and complete. Not shock, recognition. The kind that arrives when everyone realizes the outcome has been in place longer than the argument. I felt something release in my chest then. Not triumph, but relief. The system had done what systems do when left alone long enough. The board adjourned briefly. When they returned, Laura Bennett spoke again, calm and resolved, to preserve the partnership. Leadership optics needed to change. Trust had to be restored externally, decisively. The words were careful. The meaning wasn't. Chris was asked to step down, not fired, not blamed. Asked. A resignation framed as stewardship, positioned as sacrifice. He nodded slowly, understanding the offer for what it was, an exit that protected the company and closed the damage where it started. No one looked at me when it happened. They didn't need to. The moment wasn't personal. It was structural. Chris gathered his things without ceremony, his authority dissolving not with force, but with agreement, afterward. The room reset. The partner confirmed next steps. Timelines reopened, conditions lifted. $40 million began moving again. Quietly, without apology. I stayed seated for a moment after everyone left. The smile faded, replaced by something steadier. Justice. When it comes cold, doesn't celebrate, it restores alignment and moves on. As I shut my laptop, now clean and functioning, I understood something clearly. I hadn't won. I had waited, and waiting. When backed by structure, turns out to be enough. The building felt different the morning after Chris left. Not quieter, just settled. Systems hummed the way they were supposed to. Steady and unremarkable. I arrived at my desk as I always had, logged in, and reviewed the overnight confirmations without ceremony. Nothing dramatic waited for me. That was the point. The contract was active again. $40 million moved through the channels it had always been designed to use. Released not with celebration, but with confirmation receipts and time-stamped approvals. No speeches, no announcements, just alignment restored. The partners' legal team followed up with clean language and precise expectations. Trust didn't need to be rebuilt. It needed to be respected. I stayed. No one congratulated me. No one needed to. My role hadn't changed. It had simply become visible again in the way infrastructure becomes visible after stress tests. The board acknowledged continuity and moved forward. Laura Bennett passed me in the hallway and nodded once. That was enough. Chris's departure was handled carefully. A short internal notice, a polite external statement. He left with his reputation mostly intact and his confidence quietly bruised. No scandal followed him out the door. No applause marked his exit. He wasn't defeated. He was concluded. Meetings returned to their original shape. Agendas shortened. Language sharpened. Decisions slowed just enough to make sense. People spoke with more care, listening for structure instead of volume. I noticed it in small things emails that included the right people. Questions asked before assumptions hardened. Silence used as consideration rather than avoidance. The laptop sat open in front of me, fully functional. No trace of coffee left behind. I smiled at that briefly, then returned to work. Satisfaction, I realized, doesn't come from watching someone fall. It comes from seeing things work the way they're meant to after pressure has passed. By afternoon, the story was already fading. Another leadership transition. Another lesson absorbed without comment. That's how organizations survive. They forget the noise and remember the systems. As I shut down for the day, the phrase came to me without effort. Precise and unembellished. Exactly as it belonged. In the end, no one fired him. The system just stopped listening. I didn't walk away from this story feeling powerful. I walked away feeling steady. What stayed with me wasn't the fall of a CEO, but the quiet relief of knowing that dignity doesn't need noise to survive. Real strength, I learned, isn't about winning arguments or proving people wrong. It's about knowing where you stand, doing the work that no one applauds, and trusting that truth, when built into systems, habits, and principles, eventually holds. There were moments I wanted to speak up, to defend myself, to demand respect. But staying calm taught me something deeper. When you respect yourself enough to stay aligned, you don't need permission from anyone else. The world doesn't always reward the loudest voice. Sometimes it rewards the one who keeps showing up. Quietly, correctly, and with care. If you're listening right now, I'm curious, where are you listening from? A kitchen table, a quiet office, a long drive home, wherever you are. I hope this story reminded you that your unseen effort still matters. If this resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Like the video if it gave you something to reflect on. And consider subscribing if you want more stories like this, stories about calm strength, quiet justice, and finding your footing when things feel unfair.